Hello, and thank you for your interest in presenting a session at ACTFL 2025. My name is Kathleen Shelton, and I am the ACTFL Convention Committee Chair, and I will be taking you through a few steps and tips and tricks to follow as you're submitting your proposal. As you can see, the makeup of the Convention Committee encompasses the chair, 10 teachers from both K-12 and post-secondary, and from the 5 regions of the country, as well as a variety of languages and levels. You'll notice also that the convention committee staff is on here, 3 members, plus the ACTFL president is ex officio. But the convention committee selection process is led by the chair and all of the 10 teachers on the committee who are all volunteers. If you'd like to volunteer with ACTFL to either review proposals, be on the committee, or do anything else with ACTFL, there's a variety of opportunities to volunteer. You can just go to the ACTFL website and use the search button to search volunteer, and you'll see all the opportunities that come up. We always need a lot of people to help review the proposals because we get between 1,300 and 1,500 proposals for each convention. So it's always helpful to have a lot of people to review the proposals. So the call for proposals for 2025 is open. ACTFL will be in New Orleans next November 21st through the 23rd. And you can either go to the website and just search convention. There's also a web link on the bottom of this slide that tells you where you can directly go to submit a proposal. One thing to keep in mind is the submission deadline is January 17th, 2025 at 11:59 Eastern time. It is a very hard deadline. So if you try to submit after that time, or if you're in a different time zone, you won't be able to submit. As I mentioned, given the large number of proposals that we get, we do have to have a pretty tight cutoff date. If you've submitted in the past, you'll notice that the submission deadline is a week earlier. It used to be the end of January, and it has been backed up to mid-January. So just keep in mind if you're used to submitting and having a later date. So the goal of the ACTFL Convention and Expo is pretty straightforward. We want to have comprehensive professional development. We want to impact language educators, and we want to help all of our students succeed. As you're going through the submission process, you do want to click the link that says review submission guidelines, and it will take you to this form right here. You can see the URL on the bottom, and you can also access this through the PDF that is posted on the ACTFL website with this video. The submission guidelines are helpful because they take you through the whole process step by step as you're filling it out, and it just helps you know the word count and what we're looking for when keywords, etc. So it's always helpful to download the guidelines or open them up while you're submitting to make sure that you're doing everything in the most efficient way possible when you're submitting your proposal. So just some general information. You can submit one proposal as the lead presenter, and then you can also be a co-presenter on one additional proposal, or you can be a co-presenter on 2 proposals if you're not a lead presenter. So you can submit a total of 2 proposals, but you can only be the lead on one of those. Your proposal must be written in English, but you can present in other languages, and you'll have a box to check on that. For example, if you want to present in French or Chinese or Arabic, there'll be a box that will let you check the language of presentation, but you do have to write the proposal in English. When you submit your proposal, you do not have to be a member of ACTFL. However, if you are selected to present, you do have to join ACTFL or one of the partner organizations through November 30th of 2025. So the partner organizations are AATG, so German, Italian, Japanese, the 2 Chinese language organizations, and the Louisiana Foreign Language Teachers Association. So again, if you're selected, you either have to join ACTFL itself or you have to join one of the partner organizations and be active through November 30th of next year. So a little bit of information about the acceptance rates and your likelihood of getting accepted. So first off, it depends on how much meeting space we have for the convention. How many rooms do we have? How many time slots do we have, et cetera? Also, as your session is reviewed, and we'll go over this a little bit later, you get scored and you get ranked. So that has to do with how likely you are to get accepted. Also, as important is the number of proposals for each presentation type and keyword, and I'll go over that in a minute. So those are three things to keep in mind, that your score, your ranking, and the type of presentations and keyword that you choose do have an impact on the likelihood of being accepted. So for example, for 2024 in Philly, the acceptance rates for people who submitted a poster, 87% of them were accepted. Those who submitted research papers were 80%. Those who submitted the roundtables, which were 10 people at a table, had a 77% acceptance rate, and practice-oriented papers had a 73% acceptance rate. So those four areas, you have a pretty high likelihood of getting accepted. Notice, however, for the 45-minute sessions, only about half of sessions are accepted because that is the biggest type of presentation that is submitted to us. So just keep that in mind, that if you've tried to submit in the past and you haven't found a way to get accepted and you're always doing sessions, you might want to try a different type of format to see if you can get accepted through that format. Overall, the acceptance rate for all the submissions we received was 61%. We had about 1,400 submissions this year, so we had about a 61% acceptance rate. So just sort of keep in mind that there's 5 different ways to present at ACTFL. And if you want to do the 45-minute session, obviously you're welcome to submit any type, but it's harder to get your session accepted just because that's the majority of what we get. The other thing to keep in mind is the keyword. So the majority of proposals that we get, as I mentioned, mostly we get sessions. That's the biggest proposal we get. And then you can see on the left side, the most popular keywords are curriculum and instruction, technology, equitable and inclusive practices, and assessment, grading, and feedback. So if you choose one of those keywords and you submit a session, it's harder to get accepted because that's what the majority of people submit. You still can, obviously, but if you're like, I've tried that before and I just can't get in, we always need more submissions for ESL. If you look at the right side, ESL, heritage learners, DLI, diverse learners, K-16 articulation, teacher prep and recruitment, interdisciplinary and career connections. You have a higher likelihood of getting accepted with these keywords on the right because less people submit for those keywords, but we still try to balance the program. So just 2 things to keep in mind when you're making your proposal. Think of the type that you're going to submit, whether it's a session or a poster, et cetera, and also think of the keywords. So if, for example, you have one that is technology, is there a way to sort of broaden the scope of your proposal to maybe include heritage learners? Or is it a teacher preparation, or can you bring career connections to it? So the goal is we're trying to always broaden the scope and because we have a lot of different needs from our attendees. So just think about if you've had a hard time getting accepted in the past, maybe broadening the scope of what you're talking about to encompass something beyond the most popular keywords could help you. And what you can also do in your proposal is you can include some of those other keywords in there. And when people are searching for the proposal, it would come up. So you may have something that's curriculum and instruction, but also geared for K-16 articulation. You want to choose the predominant keyword, which might be the articulation, but you can use terms like curriculum and instruction, assessment, et cetera, within the description, and they will still come up when people search for it. So that's probably one of the biggest tips is when you're choosing what the type of presentation. Sessions are the hardest to get accepted, and the keywords on the left on this screen are also the most popular. So again, it's harder to get accepted with those. So let's talk about the 5 types of proposals. So as we mentioned, there's a session, there's practice papers, research papers, electronic posters, and roundtables. So a session, pretty straightforward. It's what most of us are familiar with. It's in person, 45 minutes at the front of the room. You can either have a single presenter or you can have a lead presenter with up to 3 co-presenters. So no more than 4 people leading a session. Next are our practice-oriented papers. And what this is this is a paper maybe that you've written, but it's with practical strategy. So it's not research, it's just strategies for actually teaching in the classroom or different types of strategies based on your topic. And what we do with the practice papers is we choose 3 papers that have a similar topic and we group them together into a 45-minute session. So if your practice paper is accepted, you'll present for 15 minutes. You'll have typically presenters go for about 10 minutes on their topic and then take 5 minutes for questions. And again, that needs to focus on classroom applications, activities, techniques, things that teachers can walk away with and use in the classroom. The other type of paper is the research paper. So it's the same, it works the same as the practice paper. We will choose three research papers that have a similar topic, and you will all be grouped together for a 45-minute session. And again, you'll have 15 minutes to present your paper, typically 10 minutes to present, 5 minutes for questions. And for this one, whereas the practice paper are practical strategies for the classroom, this one is about research and implications. And it's not just to read your research paper, but it's to present the data and the information and the research in an appealing format. The next type of proposal is an electronic poster. And the way this works is you're actually set up in the exhibit hall and you have 60 minutes. And what you do is you have a laptop on a high top table. And so you present your proposal, you display it on your laptop while you're at a high table. And what happens is people can walk around and they can view all the different posters, they can interact with the presenters, and they can move about to see other ones. So there'll be several people presenting posters at once. And so you'll be there. And this is nice if you want to just do interaction. People have specific questions. You had a higher likelihood of getting accepted with a poster. But this is just an alternate. If you're like, oh, I'm a little nervous about presenting in front of a lot of people, a poster is a nice way to sort of ease yourself into it. And the final one is the roundtable. Roundtables are nice because it's a 45-minute presentation, including a discussion, and it's limited to 10 people at the table, and you can't have more than 2 presenters. So minimum, you'll have 8 teachers that you interact with, but it could be 9. This is really nice if you want to have a more in-depth discussion on a topic. So sessions, you're typically in the front of the room, giving a lot of information, maybe some questions. But the roundtables are really nice if you have a topic and you're like, I really just want to get feedback on this, or I really want to have a deeper discussion. Or again, if you're not sure about presenting a full session in front of a room, roundtables are really nice to have a more in-depth discussion, a little bit more intimate discussion. So let's talk about the review process of the submissions. So basically, the timeline is, as we mentioned, January 17th by 11:59 Eastern, you have to submit your proposal online. And then the committee, everything will be scored and reviewed by everybody. And then the convention committee will make the final selections. And so by the end of April 2025, you'll know whether or not you were accepted. And again, given that we receive anywhere from 1,300 to 1,500 proposals, the convention committee can't give individual feedback about acceptance. So if you're like, I don't understand why it wasn't accepted, we just can't give individual feedback. The timeline is too tight and it's too hard to give individual feedback on everyone's presentation. So let's talk about some general guidelines. First off, when you're submitting, the first round of reviews is a masked review where nobody knows your name or your affiliation. So you want to make sure that you don't include any personally identifiable information, any PII, anywhere in your proposal. So don't put your name in it. Don't put your school or your organization. Don't put things like I was, the ACTFL toy in 2022, or I was the PNCFL toy, etc. Don't put anything in there that identifies who you are, because it could lead to disqualification. Also, what you want to do is when you're submitting, double check that all your information is accurate, especially your school. Like if you have switched schools or you're with a different organization, double check that all of that is accurate. And there's a preview button that you can check, because what happens is the information in your ACTFL profile is not always the same as what happens in the submission, what appears in the submission portal. So always double check your affiliation so that it's accurate in your proposal and during your acceptance. So all the reviewers and the committee members, I mentioned before, everybody is a volunteer teacher. So this takes a lot of time for both the committee and the reviewers. There's a lot of time invested in it, but please be aware that these are volunteers who are doing this in their free time. The selections are not chosen by ACTFL staff or employees. Everything is chosen by volunteer teachers. And as I mentioned earlier, so you actually go through a 2-round review process. So the initial review process is a masked review. At least 5 different people will look at it. And they will not see your name or your affiliation, but they will score you based on the rubric that we'll show you at the end of this presentation. And that's also in the submission guidelines. And then what happens is from your at least 5 or more reviews, the system then gives an average and then it ranks everything. And then those are sent to the convention committee for the second round. And then during the second round is when the convention committee chooses the final proposals for the convention. We also have our special interest groups, our SIGs. And so when you submit, you'll see a box where you can request to be reviewed if you're a part of a SIG, like maybe you're in the Diverse Learner SIG or you're in the German SIG or something like that. You can request to be reviewed and scored by members of your SIG. And then each SIG gets to select a session or the sessions for the final program that they want in there. So say it was the ASL SIG, and they said, okay, this is the sessions that we want in the final convention. They will choose those. But if you had been reviewed by a SIG, it doesn't mean if they don't pick you, you're out. Anything left over from the SIGs, they send back to the convention committee, and then we still look at your proposal. So choosing a SIG doesn't mean that you're less likely or more likely to be scored. It just means that the SIGs will look at you in the first round and choose 1 or 2, and then the convention committee will look at all the rest, and you could still be selected through the convention committee if your SIG did not score you. All right, so the final selection process, the convention committee, as I mentioned, we do a second round and we make the final selections from the scored and ranked proposals. And what we do is we get a huge spreadsheet with all the proposals and all the rankings and the comments from the reviewers and your scores and everything. And then what we do as the convention committee is we look through everything and we try to make sure we have a balance of language, audience level, whether it's K-12, elementary, or elementary, middle, high school, post-secondary. We look at the focus areas, keywords, experts in the field. We look at current trends. For example, AI is really popular. So the convention committee doesn't just say, okay, we're going to choose 500 sessions and we're just going to take the top 500. We look at everything. Your score and ranking is very important, but it's not an automatic selection just because you were scored in the top. Again, we look at a balance of everything is keywords, languages, etc., to make sure we meet the needs of as many attendees as possible. We do have a non-commercial policy. I'm not going to read this whole thing. You can read this if you need to pause. But basically, we have a lot of presenters who can only attend ACTFL if they're actually presenting, and then their school will pay for their funding. So we do prioritize teachers who are in the classroom and would need extra funding to be able to attend ACTFL. And so if you are part of an exhibitor or a for-profit company or you have a commercial product, you don't submit your proposal through this. So this is for educators, typically in the classroom, and I'll go in a little bit more detail on that, but it's not about commercial products, it's about professional learning. And the first time that you do log in to submit your proposal, you'll see our non-commercial policy pop up, and you are required to read and agree to that policy regarding exhibitors and commercial entities. So again, the first thing is that presentations must be educational and they must be non-commercial. So there's no selling products or services during your session presentation. You also cannot endorse or promote any commercial product in which you have an affiliation or self-interest. So if you're talking about Kahoot or Quizlet or something like that, and you do not work for that company, it's okay to mention something general like that. But for example, say you have a little side gig with a publisher, you cannot promote that publisher or the publisher's products or anything like that during your session. So everything has to just be straight professional learning. You can share free resources, but you have to have them in an independent space from commercial products. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But say you're a classroom teacher, but you also sell a few things on Teachers Pay Teachers. You cannot advertise your Teachers Pay Teachers site, and you can't share any products that anyone would have to pay for. So you would have to house them in a Google Drive or on a different site to say, here's free resources that I offer, but they must be in a completely different space than anything commercial. So who can submit these types of proposals? So if you are with a nonprofit, you can submit a proposal online and share things that are free. So we have a lot of language resource centers. We have, schools, universities, state organizations, et cetera. So if you're with all the AATs, so if you're nonprofit, you can submit a proposal, share resources, but everything has to be free. If you're a teacher, but you're also like an independent or a consultant, or you have like a little side gig, like maybe you help write readers, or maybe you've written chapters in a textbook, you can still submit as long as this is not, you're not an employee of that company. So again, you can only share free resources that are housed independently. So say you're a classroom teacher, but you also help write books for a publisher, you cannot talk about anything that you do with that publisher. Everything has to be what you're doing in your classroom, free resources. If you have an online marketplace, as I mentioned, say you sell on Teachers Pay Teachers or something, but you're a teacher also in the classroom, you can submit proposals. You just can't, as I mentioned earlier, you can't promote anything that anyone would have to pay for. So who cannot submit online? So if you're an exhibitor in the exhibit hall, you've set up with ACTFL for an exhibitor, or you're a full or part-time employee of one of our exhibitors, you cannot submit a regular presentation. The exhibitors have access to purchasing exhibitor workshops, which are hugely popular. So you would have to present, if you're with the exhibitor, you would have to present an exhibitor workshop. If you own a company and your whole goal is to sell products, and you're either own the company or you're an employee of them, you would have to become an exhibitor and present an exhibitor workshop. So company cannot come in and do a regular proposal, because the proposals, the regular proposals for teachers outside of the exhibit hall are strictly for professional learning. All right, let's talk about the scoring rubrics. So if you have downloaded the submission guidelines, the rubrics are on the last couple pages of the submission guidelines, and I'm just going to give a quick overview here. So they have a total of 20 points. Each section is worth 4 points. So and this is for a full session. The research papers and the papers and roundtables are -1 session, but for the session, or -1 section, but for the sessions, you have 4 points for your title and description, the relevance of the proposal, the content and purpose, the outcomes for attendees, and your strategies for engagement during the proposal. So I'm going to show you a lot of information. I'm not going to read it all. You can pause the video to read the slides, but I want to just show you what's involved. All right, so step by step, when the reviewers look at this, and also when the convention committee looks at it, the first thing they do is they look at your proposal, title, and description, and they rank you and score you on a score of 1 through 4. Is it well written? Does it align with the content and purpose of the proposal? So if I'm looking at this in the convention program, is it well written? Does it align? The relevance is either your proposal has to be relevant to the world readiness standards, it has to be relevant to proficiency-oriented instruction, or it has to be related to an important issue in our field. So those are the 3 things that you're getting scored on. The content and purpose, again, is it innovative, or does it reflect current trends or research? Does it advance teaching and learning? So is it something that is going to help educators in our field? We look at the outcomes, and you're scored basically, are they clear, specific, and measurable? And do they align with everything else in the proposal? And then for sessions, there's also a section on strategies for engagement. And what this means is that, are you engaging the participants as opposed to just making this a sit and get? So is there high participant involvement, and what are they? You want to make sure you're specific. So for these 5 parts, when you're getting scored, you want to make sure you're very specific on all 5 parts of it, because that's what the reviewers are looking for. And as the reviewers score this, they also have a comment box. So they may say the description was unclear, or it's not really relevant to this, et cetera, to the standards or anything, instruction or an important issue. So when they are reviewing your proposal, not only do they give you a number score, but they are required to also give a comment about why they gave you the score they did. All right, so here you can see the rubric. Again, I'm not going to read everything to you, but you can see for the proposal title and description, we've highlighted on here for you what is it that we're looking for under the number 4, and then how it goes down to 3, 2, 1. So again, I'm not going to read all this, but you can pause this to read through that. So when you're doing your title and description, here are some things to include. For example, you want to have a hook or a topic sentence that will set the theme, a couple examples that are concrete, and then how will you engage the participants. Things you want to avoid, don't use first person or possessive pronouns. Don't use I, you, we, or I, we, my, etc. You want to use third person. So in this session, the participants will be exposed to or understand, etc. Don't identify yourself, as we mentioned. Don't identify your institution. And try to be specific. Like if you just put teaching language through songs, that doesn't really tell anybody anything. So you want to be specific. All right, so here's an example. This is a good example of one. Feel free to pause here and you can read this. Here's another one. Again, feel free to pause and you can read through another good example. So these were sessions that were accepted, and this is what the proposal looked like. Here's a couple examples of descriptions that would need more information. So you can take a look at this one. You can pause and take a look at that one. All right. Next section of the rubric is the relevance of the proposal. Again, you can see the highlights of what the reviewers and the convention committee are looking for, all the way from a 4 down to a 1. So again, the relevance is it related to the standards, proficiency-oriented instruction, or an issue that is relevant and important to the field right now. Okay, so that's sort of the same thing there, the 3 things. The third part of the rubric is the content and purpose. Again, you can see what we're looking for. Is it innovative? Does it reflect important trends? Does it have research-informed practices? Does it have specific knowledge and skills? So any one of those 4 is what the reviewers are looking for. So again, when you're doing the content, think about current issues that are happening. And there's just different places you can, if you're on social media or the actual forums, look at the past programs, what was accepted. That's a really good idea of well-worded proposals that were accepted. The thing to keep in mind is try to focus only about 3 aspects of your topic, because you only have 45 minutes in a session, or 15 minutes if it's a paper or a research paper or a practice paper. So you don't want to go too much, because the reviewers will say this is too much information for a 45-minute session, and you risk being declined because you have too much information in there. Okay, so again, concrete examples, connect to other disciplines, be inclusive, and focus on learners and educators. Here's some things to avoid. Just detailing multiple articles, unproductive debates, criticizing other trends, going on past practices, etc. All right, the next section of the rubric is the outcome. So what do you want your attendees to walk away with? So the biggest thing, as you can see under the number 4, is you want to make sure you're clear, specific, measurable, and they align with your proposal. So again, here's some examples, make them explicit. Keep your time limit in mind, as we mentioned. If you have too much information trying to put into a 45-minute sessions that can hurt your score, because the reviewers will say this is too much. They won't be able to do all this in 45 minutes. And then the last one is, if you're doing a session, is the engagement. So again, you can see what are you going to actually do to engage them and have participants be involved. Okay, so here's different examples you can look at. You can pause this to look at this. So again, the biggest thing is just to be specific in what you're doing. All right, some final tips before I sign off. So again, remember the deadline is 11:59 Eastern time on in January 15th. If you copy and paste text from elsewhere, just be mindful of your character limits, symbols, accent marks. Sorry, January 17th, not 15th. Sorry. You may want to have a colleague read it and rate you against the rubric. And also, if English is not your dominant language, just get input on natural language from other people. You can use, other tools out there to help you write your proposal, but just make sure still, even if you use tools to help you, that you still review it, make sure it sounds natural, that it doesn't sound like it's just something created by AI or something like that. And again, if you're not accepted, try, you can always resubmit for next year. So again, go to the ACTFL site, call for proposals is open, and hopefully we will see you in New Orleans.